Hello, Mr. Glavance again here. Going to talk to you about Paper 2, Elizabethan England. It's going to be a very quick one, so feel free to slow it down or re-listen. This one is mostly just focused on content. So, Elizabethan England. The whole point is basically what's going on in Elizabethan England, religiously, politically, economically, and socially. The course is broken up into 3 parts, which is what about power, Elizabethan court and parliament. It's about what's life like in Elizabethan England, and finally that kind of political religious aspect, which is troubles at home and abroad. First part, Elizabethan court and parliament. You see here a nice image of her royal court, which is a mixture of where the nobles gather, but it's also a source of entertainment and setting the standards. So first of all, you've got to remember Elizabeth herself is a Tudor, which means she is of royal blood. No one else can really claim that. She is intelligent, speaks many languages. She's basically watched her older sister Mary, Bloody Mary, make mistake after mistake, and she's like, right, I can't really be confrontational. We need compromise. She's also a woman, which means it's a positive and negative. It's a positive because men want to marry her, and that means she has their loyalty, or at least their pretense at loyalty. But ultimately, if she does get married, they'll take over because England is very sexist at this point of time. Also, of course, there's just that simple attitude. Men challenge whether or not they should be ruled by her. Within England, power is basically divided by patronage, and that is essentially giving power down. It's also this idea of divine right from the great chain of being, with God at the top and bugs at the bottom, and essentially, from human terms, Elizabeth's at the top. The other wider background you've got to remember is that Elizabeth comes to power on the back of a very disrupted, turbulent time in England. What I mean by that is Henry, her father, came to power pretty much after a civil war. So the country, the people are tired of that divide. Also, of course, when Henry broke from Rome and set up the Church of England, his son Edward continued it. His daughter Mary, Bloody Mary, tried to push back to Catholicism. And ultimately, again, people are tired and scared of this constant change. So when she comes to power, yes, she's young, yes, she's a woman, but most people are going, I don't want to start this again. Now, the most important people in England are the nobles, and the most important nobles are basically on the Privy Council. Why are they there? Basically because they've got loads of land and therefore power and influence. Elizabeth needs their support, but also at the same time, they need her. Because you see, the guys on the Privy Council are basically Puritans. Sorry, not Puritans, Protestants. Some are Puritans. And they've got no interest in losing their power, influence, and prestige in Elizabethan England, Protestant England, because if a Catholic took over, they won't get near that kind of power. And in fact, it's likely that they'll be pushed to the side, have some of their land, influence, etc. taken. So it's this kind of double role where she needs them and they need her. What do? Basically, they run the country for her. Some of the most important ones are Walsingham, who's the spy master also, Cecil, Essex, who she uses her patronage to promote him to Privy Council, even though he's basically just her kind of toy boy, up-and-coming young dashing hero. I mean, you've got Dudley, who was a loyal old friend who she may have loved, but ultimately he was tainted by the fact that he may or may not have pushed his wife down the stairs. Underneath the Privy Council, they have these kind of 2 groups who basically help them run the country. The first is Lord Lieutenants. They're really important. They're made up of gentry and nobles, mostly nobles, and they just do all the admin, the actual day-to-day running. They organize militias if needed, and most importantly, taxes. And of course, money is important. Lower down the pecking order from them are justices of the peace, mostly made up of gentry, but basically they just make sure law and order is sorted in England. Those guys report to the Privy Council, and of course the Privy Council use their patronage to promote people, and it's this kind of downward roll of power. Parliament is the last main group. Essentially, it's mostly made up again gentry and nobles, And it's for the most powerful people in England outside the royal court, outside of the Privy Council, to essentially meet. Now, they might not necessarily be heard, but the whole point is they have a place to come and discuss and to give their opinions, to give their advice. Doesn't mean the Queen has to listen, but of course, if she keeps ignoring them, then it's kind of like, you're not a great monarch. However, Elizabeth doesn't really like engaging with them, partly because, of course, it's somewhat a hinted at limitation on her power, and she only really meets them, goes to them for the tax question. Basically, they're in charge of raising laws and taxes, and she only meets them 11 times just for taxes. She does interact with them on letters and communications and things like that, but ultimately, only 11 times in the whole reign does she actually go to Parliament, and it's all about tax. So it tells you something quite important, which is they're not hugely powerful, but when it comes to money, she needs them. So what are the key problems of her reign? Well, ultimately sexism. She's young, she's inexperienced. I chose that picture in particular because she does look really childlike. Her heir, because remember, she never gets married, her heir is Mary, Queen of Scots, who is, of course, a Catholic. So if anything happens to Elizabeth, a Catholic comes back into power. And that's a problem because people are saying to Elizabeth, you should get married. Beyond that, there's not much money left over because her father basically spent it all fighting wars in France and taking it off to the church. And she's basically got a divided England because of religion, where some are Catholic, some are Protestant, and some nobles are still smarting over lost prestige and title and land. And so just have got a real fine balancing act to sort. Now, when it comes to her suitors, as we've said, on the one hand, if she got married and had an heir, it really helps her. But the counter is that man will probably try and take over or influence England if he's a foreigner. So she's in a real tricky position. Some of the suitors are Dudley, who, as I mentioned, was a really close friend, possibly lover. Not lover, but someone she loved as a young person, etc. But ultimately, he was tainted by this accusation he may have killed his wife. Essex, this was much later in her reign, when she's an older lady, and basically she kind of fancies him, and he's young, and he's attractive, and he's energetic and everything, but really it's just the same thing of an older person basically enjoying someone young around them who's exciting. Foreign suitor wise, you got Philip of Spain, who of course was married officially to her older sister Mary, Bloody Mary, and you got the French prince, who is also a suitor. Basically, no way she can marry them. They are Catholic, and they would drag Spain and France into England. So she can't do it. But here's the kicker. She needs to get them to think there's a chance. Therefore, not antagonize, and also just say, you know what? Keep asking to marry me, and it's easier than fighting a war. Now, the big thing with her biggest problem is ultimately that she has no heir, and all of those Protestants, the Privy Council, the Parliament, Justices of Peace, Lord Lieutenants, all basically like, if you die, a Catholic will probably take over, Mary Queen of Scots, and that will just completely take away our power. And one Puritan in Parliament called Peter Wentworth was really upset about this and kept saying, we need to discuss this. This is something for the whole country. It's not just her. And she got annoyed and she's like, no, this is my decision only. You've got nothing to talk about. And there was this moment where it's like, how much is he going to push it? And basically Parliament said, no, stop right there. They sent Peter, a parliamentarian, to jail in the Tower of London before Elizabeth acted. This is a great example of how essentially Parliament wasn't that powerful and were still essentially respectful / afraid of the Queen's power. So now we know what power she did have. Let's have a look at how she's challenged. Essentially, there's a religious rebellion early in her reign by Norfolk. Norfolk goes to Mary Elizabeth and he basically says, look, I want to marry Mary, Queen of Scots. Elizabeth's like, not a chance, because one, you're a powerful noble, two, she's my heir and a Catholic, you're a Catholic, and this will be a powerhouse I do not want to have in my life. He basically ignores her, goes up north to raise a rebellion, and he's quite successful. He raises a few thousand men, he marches on Durham, they have a Catholic mass in the cathedral, and it's like, yay for Catholicism in northern England. However, Cecil quickly rallies the soldiers and puts it down, puts the uprising down. Northumberland is executed. I forget the other one's name, the cousin. He flees off in exile. Well, I can't remember who's now what. One of them is executed. One of them goes into exile, and basically Norfolk goes into Tower of London. However, the rebellion doesn't stop there because, of course, Elizabeth gets excommunicated by the Pope, and Ridolfi, who's this Italian banker working on behalf of the Pope, is just giving money to every Catholic in England to kind of keep the rebellion alive. Walsingham discovers that Ridolfi and Norfolk are in communication, and basically it's like, yeah, that's strike two, and he's executed. Now, after that, not really too many rebellions really happened, none of any note, until the end of her reign. And this was by Essex. And you see, Essex was her favourite. She'd promoted him to the Privy Council. She'd given him the sweet and wine monopoly. She'd put him in a position of power in the army. All because she basically fancies him. Not because he deserved it necessarily. But, like what happens normally, they have an argument. And he basically, in front of everyone at the Privy Council, stands up and turns his back on her. Which, of course, is not something you do to the monarch. She's angry, whacks him on the head. He's about to draw a sword, others stop him, and basically he leaves in a huff, and Elizabeth is fuming. How dare he even think to act like that? But she still has that soft spot for him. So basically she sends him off to Ireland, where there's fighting between England and the Irish, and that's the end of it. But not for Essex. Essex right now is getting more and more paranoid. He's like, I'm out of sight, out of mind. All my power is going to get washed away by a new favourite. In other words, in his head, it is for Cecil. So Essex basically does what he always does, acts rashly. He makes certain soldiers knights. He makes deals with locals, alliances, basically acting way beyond his powers. And then, to make matters worse, he returns to England. And he bursts in on the Queen in her night chamber or bedroom, basically. And she, at an old age, don't forget, wearing wigs, wearing masses of makeup to hide her pock-marked skin from when she got smallpox. And essentially, she looks old and she looks bad. And she is fuming that he's seen her like this. And that's it. That's the end of it. She's done with him. She looks old and vulnerable, and she's just done with him. She removes the patronage, takes away his powers, and he basically thinks, well, that's it, I'm done. So one last throw of the dice. He rallies his supporters, kidnaps members of the Privy Council, but very quickly Cecil, his nemesis, his rival, orders his arrest warrant, rallies a few soldiers. As soon as Essex's own followers see what's going on, like, what? This is not what we signed up for. And it will basically disappear. The Privy Council is released and Essex is executed. So why did all these plots fail? Well, the first one is too many people are tired from that religious and civil war background, but it's like not really wanting to rise up. The second is, and as well as the first, she didn't have an heir. So it was ultimately the people kind of still willing to give her a go. Walsingham and his spies, in particular for Northern Rebellion and Ridolfi, was really efficient. But the first plot is pretty much in her favour because Norfolk wasn't strong enough on his own. There wasn't the desire for that religious rebellion. For Essex, it wasn't really a strong rebellion. It was essentially someone trying to, almost like a palace coup. So it wasn't a big nation attempt. Now, the important thing there is one's at the beginning, one's at the end of her reign, and she survives both of them. The second one, Essex's rebellion, is a bit more personal because, of course, it was someone that she had elevated, given lots of patronage to, and it hadn't really worked out in her favour. So it shows poor judgment. Part 2, Life in England. Well, first of all, you got to remember that there's this hierarchy, the great chain of being. Basically, everyone wants land to hunt and all the rest of it, to live off the land, which of course is farming and things. And that's basically what makes you a noble. The gentry are these new up-and-coming rich traders, not everyone, but many are, and they're basically trying to become one of the nobles so we can get to that royal court, the height of fashion, and ultimately, progress from society's views. Underneath them, you've got the peasants who basically just do all the work. For Elizabeth in particular, she quite likes the gentry because one, they're new, they're exciting, they're trying these things, but also because if she makes them a noble, which she often does, they are very loyal to her because she's made them nobles. Beyond this, the most important, of course, is theatre. Elizabeth likes it, she promotes it, it's a matter of patronage, so many nobles then support it financially. They build the Globe, which is purpose-built theatre. Before the Globe, they're just doing it in barns and pubs and things like that. Shakespeare's plays, of course, are also means of propaganda for the Tudor line, in particular the play Richard III, which is basically anti-York and pro-Lancaster, so it's pro-Tudor. There's also a new thing where everyone is enjoying it, the rich and poor. You got the standing area, like today, you got the standing area for 10 quid or whatever, not 10 quid back then, but you got the standing area for poor people and the royal circle where you get nobles and things. Of course, not everyone liked it. You got the Puritans who basically saying, no, it's a distraction, we shouldn't be watching it. So not everyone's happy. Was it a golden age is the classic question. Well, number one, the theatre's at its peak, and you can make the direct point that it is still very much alive in this country today, all around the world. Shakespeare, you got a new Globe, and basically it has had a massive cultural difference, cultural impact on England today. Theatre today was widely shaped by Shakespeare and Elizabethan England. Beyond this, we've got our education, which is starting to grow in Elizabethan England. Not everyone, mostly for men and women, but ultimately there is a growing education in England. There's lots of literature, loads and loads of portraits, so loads of paintings, and most of them are all about showing the power of England, ruffs and all. This idea of Gloriana, glorious England. They're building estates, not castles. They're eating new exotic foods such as sugar, meat, pineapples, and of course more and more spice from the east. Anything from a new world, don't forget, including potatoes. But of course it's not all a golden age. You've also got the classic bad culture, bad social, which is the classic boxing, blood sports, bear baiting, cockfighting, dog fighting, alchemy, where people are trying to turn gold into trying to turn other metals into gold, and basically that's like, it's literally called fool's gold, where they try to do these things, and it just shows that kind of stupidity, really. Astrology is believed in, and there's lots of poverty. Speaking of poverty, what caused it? Well, ultimately Henry closed the monasteries. They're the ones that usually help the poor. They're gone now because Henry got rid of the Catholic monasteries and basically took the gold for himself. The land is being farmed in a different way with enclosures. They're splitting up the land, which means you need less people actually now to farm, so lots of unemployed people. Food prices go up, there's starvation. Why? Pretty much because of massive increase in population, over an extra 1 million people, which means less jobs, less food. And there's more people, rent goes up, which means less food for everyone, less money for everyone to spend. Now, when you look at the poor, effectively you've got to always consider before, during, and after. Well, first of all, as I said, the church looked after the poor. You would give alms, which is just help. The church would have alms houses for some people who just had nowhere to go. And the poor were generally seen in two categories. You have the deserving poor who want to work, they want to improve but can't, and therefore they deserve your help. The opposite of that is the undeserving poor. They don't deserve your help, and they're the idle and tricksters. Well, what's often forgotten is that the wealthy are starting to give more and more money to help the poor, but it's Harman's book which basically gets into this idea that the poor are tricksters. They are the the bedlam. They're acting like a crazy person. All of these different tricks that they do to basically get your money. So the idea, the fear of the poor and the tricks and the undeserving poor is rising in England. And there are some ad hoc attempts to fix this, such as in York, where they actually give licenses to beggars, and essentially it's like you either do it or you go to the House of Correction. In Ipswich, the same thing, but there's also a youth training scheme or House of Correction. In Norwich, they basically say, well, the idle, you get a job, the unfortunate, you get food and help, and if you don't, then you go to House of Correction. And essentially, Elizabeth kind of takes a bit of pieces of these different things to create a new national 1601 poor law. And it's the first national law. And essentially, she says there's three types: the helpless, who we should give food and care to; the able-bodied, give them work for either food or shelter or indeed pay; and for those who are idle, House of Correction. And this is so successful, it basically sticks around for 200 years. So it's a very significant cultural impact. Part 3, troubles at home and abroad. So, got to remember again, what are these troubles? Well, first of all, Henry broke from Rome and turned England Protestant, which essentially upsets every single Catholic in England, in Spain, and France, and of course the Pope. His son, Edward, he continues to make England more Protestant. He introduces the Book of Common Prayer, which is a Protestant holy book of prayers, basically. His sister, when she takes the throne, Bloody Mary, she starts to change it, back to Catholicism. Now, Elizabeth, when she takes power, is kind of stuck in this middle. She doesn't want to go the way her brother went. She doesn't want to go the way her sister went. She wants a middle ground. And essentially, that's what her Act of Settlement is. It's a compromise. She says priests can marry, one for the Protestants. The services should be in English, not Latin, one for the Protestants. The book, not boom, the Book of Common Prayer, one for the Protestants. But she doesn't call herself the head of the church. She calls herself the governor. That's one for the Catholics. She says, look, whatever you do in private, I don't care. Just as long as you officially, publicly, are very going to the Protestant church. That's one for the Catholics. She also picks a moderate archbishop, which again is one for the Catholics because they're not going to get persecuted. She's not going to do what her sister did to Protestants, or Catholics rather. And the two laws that do this are the Act of Supremacy and Uniformity. Now, the problem though is that soon after you again have that Northern Rebellion and Papal Bull and Ridolfi plot. This annoys her because she's tried to be compromising. So what she does is she introduces fines. Now these aren't exactly the biggest fines in the world to pay. So for the peasants, they're going to church because they can't pay the fine. For some gentry and nobles, however, it doesn't cost them much, so they're happy to just pay the fine. However, there's no rosary beads, which is like a Catholic prayer bead. And essentially it's a way of identifying. So it's something to just don't have out. But then it doesn't really get better. And if anything, it gets a bit worse. So what she does is says, look, we're going to increase the fine now, the recusancy fine, higher. So it's actually going to hurt the nobles and the gentry. Also importantly, she basically says you can't now convert to Catholicism. So she's stopping people becoming Catholic. Next, she allows Catholicism for 23 years in private. That's the success of the Elizabethan settlement. However, it all falls apart at the Throckmorton plot, where basically all about Gualter and Ridolfi starts to really come together, and it's a plot to get rid of Elizabeth and replace her with Mary. Then, soon after, the Babington plot, that's the one where Mary agrees to the plot to get rid of Elizabeth. She's caught out by Walsingham, and is executed. Basically, around this time, Catholic priests are banned, the Armada sets sail, and soon after that, a state of confinement, which basically means you can't, if you're Catholic, go more than a few miles from your home. So, in short, her settlement worked for a long old period of time, but when Mary starts to stir the pot, it all goes wrong. She cracks down, she gives up the tolerance, and especially with Armada, she's like, nope, I don't trust them. Just on the other things to do with religion, since you got the Jesuits, they're extreme Catholics, they set up training camps, College of Denai, they send missionaries to England, they basically use Ridolfi's gold to stir up trouble. They're basically the extreme Catholics. There's one called Cardinal Allen. He's basically an English Jesuit who's waiting to take over once Catholic rule returns. And one of the missionaries, a guy called Campion, he's in England. He gets caught, he gets killed. So that's basically what's going to happen if you're caught proselytizing, or rather being a missionary for Catholicism in England. You will be killed. Indeed, you can't even have a Catholic priest in your home anymore, because, again, that will be treason. Now, that's the Catholics. What about the Protestants? Essentially, you've got the Puritans. And the Puritans are basically the extreme Protestants. They're the ones who are like, no, we need to crack down on Catholicism. And that's why they're not happy with the religious settlement, which also allows surplices, which essentially are fancy gowns that the priests wear. Now, on the whole, the Puritans just pretty much get on and they grumble every now and again. But those who are more extreme Puritans, you've got Protestants, you got the slightly more extreme Puritans, and then the even more extreme Presbyterians. And these guys are like, no, we do not like this act of settlement. We do not like the fact that as Catholics, we think Elizabeth needs to crack down, and we do not basically respect her church of compromise. So they set up their own. At first, Elizabeth is like, I can't really crack down too much, mostly because there's actually a lot of Privy Council Puritans who are sympathetic, like Walsingham, like Cecil. But when they die, she cracks down hard, bans the church, arrests people, etc. When Stubbs, he's a pamphleteer, he's got a printing press, when he criticizes Elizabeth and her suiting of French and Spanish marriages with the King of France and the King of Spain, Prince of France, he criticizes her doing that, and basically to punish him, his hand is chopped off. So you see, she's starting to become less tolerant as the years go by.